Hi dear children, welcome to the next session on the chapter Organisms and Populations. In this module, we'll be talking about the next type of population interaction, that is competition. Competition is a type of interspecific interaction in which both the species are harmed. No benefit is caused for both the species or either of the species. Both the species are harmed, and that type of negative interaction is called as competition. It is a process in which the fitness of one species is significantly lower in the presence of another species. The fitness of one species, or it is meaning the R value. R value means the intrinsic rate of natural increase. Its potential to increase is very lower in the presence of another species. And interspecific competition is a potent force for organic evolution to take place as the fittest is getting selected by the nature. And competition occurs when the closely related species compete for the same type of resources. As I told you, competition occurs when both the interacting species are competing for the same type of resource. But there are instances when unrelated species can also compete for the same resource. Not only closely related species, unrelated species are also competing for the same type of resource. And an example for such an instance is the flamingos and fishes in some shallow South American lakes compete for zooplanktons. That is the same type of resource, that is zooplanktons are being competed by both the flamingos and fishes in some shallow South American lakes. And competition occurs in abundant resources also, even when it is not occurring only when the resources are limited. It also occurs when the resources are in abundance. For example, the interference competition. The feeding efficiency of one species is reduced due to the presence of other species even when the resources are abundant. And such type of competition is called as interference competition, and this type of interference competition is occurring when the resources are in abundance. It is because the feeding efficiency of one species is reduced due to the presence of the other species because they are competitively more equipped to have more feeding efficiency. Let us learn certain evidences for competition. The Abingdon tortoises in the Galapagos Islands, these are the Abingdon tortoises which is found in the Galapagos Islands. It became extinct within a decade when goats were introduced into this island because the goats had greater browsing efficiency than the tortoises. So they started to get extinct within a decade, and that is an evidence for such type of competition. Now let us learn about another strategy of competition, that is competitive release. It is the expansion of distributional range of a species when the competing species is removed. That is, one species, its distribution, it gets expanded when its competitor is being removed from that particular habitat. Now let us learn about the Cornells field experiment in order to understand the competitive release. On the rocky seacoast of Scotland, there are two barnacles present. And the two barnacles name are the Balanus and Cathamalus. The Balanus barnacle is large and superior when compared to the Cathamalus, which is a smaller one. And in nature, the Balanus dominates the intertidal area and it excludes it does not allow the survival of Cathamalus in that particular intercoastal area. But in the Cornells field experiment, when experimentally they removed the Balanus, that is a larger and superior barnacle, the Cathamalus colonized the intertidal zone. That is, in the absence of the competitive species, that is a Balanus, it resulted in the expansion of the distributional range of the Cathamalus in the intertidal zone. That is with regard to the competitive release, and we have learned with an example of the barnacles. Next is we are going to learn about the Gauss's competitive exclusion principle. Gauss's competitive exclusion principle. It states that when two closely related species, they compete for the same resource, they cannot coexist indefinitely. When they are competing for the same resource, they cannot exist indefinitely, and the competitively inferior one will be eliminated eventually by the competitively superior one. And this may be true in limited resource but not otherwise. If the resource is abundant, this competitive exclusion principle will not be practical. Species facing competition may evolve mechanisms to coexist rather than exclusion, and this is called as resource partitioning. Instead of getting excluded, instead of getting completely eliminated or removed, such competitors who compete for the same resource, what do? They evolve in such a way they evolve mechanisms for coexistence rather than exclusion. For example, we can see in this tree a smaller yellow bird species forages across the whole tree. In this first figure 1, we can see the yellow smaller birds is foraging the whole tree. Slowly, a larger red species, the yellow bird species were already existing or foraging on the whole tree. Slowly, a larger red species compete for the same resource, that is that particular tree. And within a course of time, the red dominates in the middle for more abundant resources. We can see they dominate in the middle part of the tree in the third figure. And what happens? The yellow adapts to new niche, avoiding competition. We can see it is found in the lower part and in the upper part of the tree. And that is called as Gauss's competitive exclusion. And this is called, this is an example of resource partitioning in which both the birds, that is the yellow species and the red species, they evolve in such a way for coexistence rather than exclusion. Now, the Gauss's competitive exclusion principle, that is resources partitioning. It is the division of limited resources by species in order to avoid competition. As we just told now, they evolve in such a way so that they do not get excluded. They coexist and they divide the limited resource by the species to avoid competition. For this, they choose different feeding times or different foraging patterns. For example, Mark Arthur, this is Mark Arthur, and he showed that 5 closely related species of the warblers living on a tree could avoid competition. All these 5 species of warblers, they are considered to be competitors because they compete for the same resource and they are living on the same tree, could avoid competition and coexist due to the behavioral differences in their foraging activities. They brought about differences in their foraging. Foraging means act of obtaining their food. So they made a difference in the foraging activities and thus they started to coexist. And this happens when there is limited resource by the species and in order to avoid competition. We can see the warblers. These are the 5 warblers. And they started to change their foraging activities in order to coexist and to avoid competition. Dear children, in this module, we learned about the interspecific interaction, that is competition, and it is taking place when both closely related species are competing for the same type of resource. Not only in this instance, it also takes place when the resources is in abundance, and also it takes place between unrelated species. And when the resources are abundant, it takes place, competition takes place due to the feeding efficiency of one species over the other. We learned about competition release, we learned about Gauss's exclusion principle and also the resource partitioning. Thank you.